I'm excited to sit down today with Franco Lombardo and Thomas Clark with Veritage International. They're specialists in emotional governance for wealthy families. They've pioneered a unique approach to family wealth management that goes far beyond traditional financial planning. They're completing a groundbreaking research involving over 70 interviews with current wealth holders and next generation family members. And they're uncovering a startling reality. Most wealthy families are facing a communication crisis that threatens their legacy. Franco and Tom, before we delve into your research findings, I would love to hear about your journeys. How did you two come together, and why was this research so important to you?
Thomas, you go first.
Yeah, well, thanks very much for having us. First of all, my journey is a little bit winding. My education is actually in international development, but really on the sort of education policy side of it. And over a decade ago, life happens, and I ended up moving back to Montreal, where I'm from, and I got a job with a single family office there. And their mission was really education. It was developing education for small and medium-sized family businesses, but really on the soft skills side of things, around communication, around some governance pieces, and that was really influential to me. And a few years after starting that, actually, is when I met Franco. He had just released his fifth book. And he kindly offered to develop a piece of content with us around some of the concepts in his book. And so fast forward today, about 13 years later, I now work with Franco at Veritage. And it's been a great sort of 2.5 years that we've been together. And I think this research is really going to help us kind of add to the space in terms of some of the emotional challenges that families of wealth and really all families face. Franco?
So I come from wealth management. I was in it for 16 years and I was good at it, but I was bored. It wasn't really my jam.
Yeah.
And a coach at the time suggested that I wasn't really having much of an impact with my career and that I should consider doing something else. So I had a chance to look internally and realize that I really wanted to help create a safer world because I never really felt safe, emotionally safe as a child. And the medium I choose to execute that purpose through was family businesses and family offices. So I've created a coaching firm where we coach some of the world's most affluent and successful families in helping the family members feel emotionally safe so they can have the conversations they need to have. And I met Thomas at an event that I was speaking at, really liked him, liked his approach. And when the opportunity was right, I made him an offer that frankly he couldn't refuse. So here we are.
Here we are. All right. Um, so let's just dive in. Your research is revealing something shocking. Two-thirds of the next generation and wealthy families can't see a path to taking over what their families built. That's not a succession problem. That's really a family crisis. What's really going on behind closed doors in these families? And can you walk us through some of your findings?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for that. So over the course of the last year and a half, we interviewed 35 founder current owners and 42 next gens. And our focus was really looking at how they're preparing for wealth transfer and what are some of the challenges that they face both individually and as a family. Some of these families still have operating companies, but by and large, they're family offices, investing families. It skews a little bit more towards North America, quite a bit from Australia as well. But we do have representation in the survey from Latin America, Asia, as well as Europe. So what we're finding is like you said, a pretty serious disconnection between these two generations, and it comes in a couple of forms. There's definitely a lack of planning that's involved, and we'll talk about some of the intricacies of that a little bit later. There's certainly a lack of communication between the generations. We have some statistics to share on that as well. And really, as Franco said or alluded to earlier, it's really, families are not really developing an environment where safe exchange can happen. By and large, a lot of the families that see issues happening are leaving it to their governance structures to deal with, readily acknowledging that those are not designed to deal with some of the issues that they're having. Now, we can get into some of the numbers, but one thing we also like to look at is what are the consequences of this? And the consequences of this really are the disconnection between the generations. And this is being felt in a couple of areas that are really, really crucial to families as they transition wealth and just as they are. So it's being felt through the preparations or lack thereof for succession. It's being felt in family relationships, and it's being felt in individual contribution and personal value, which is a little bit what you alluded to with one 2/3 of the next gen not seeing a path written out for them. And it's really sort of it's really deep into kind of the emotional challenges and the engagement of the family as a unit. Now, again, there's a number of different reasons for this, but I think one of the larger ones is the inclusion aspect of planning for the next generation and not necessarily planning with the next generation. But those are kind of, the high level takeaways from our research, and we'll get into some of the numbers. But again, one of the consequences we are seeing is a disengagement of the next generation, and that takes several different forms that Franco can speak to.
So I think, when you look at a family business or any relationship, the biggest enemy to that relationship is silence. And so you got to ask yourself, why is there silence? And there is silence because the family members don't feel emotionally safe to speak their truth with each other. Somewhere along the line, they were made to feel emotionally unsafe, most of the time unintentionally, right? So they speak the truth and they got put down or ridiculed or made fun of. So they said, it's not safe to speak my truth. So we have, you know, relationships in family businesses and families of wealth that aren't talking to each other. And what's happening is a lot of families and advisors are making the assumption that if they have traditional governance like family councils, boards of directors, shareholders agreements, family constitutions, that provides a vehicle for communication.
Mm,
Having said that, if there is a lack of emotional safety, that communication is not going to happen, and those governance structures aren't going to be as efficient as they can be.
got it. Got it. So when you walk into a family office or a wealthy family for the first time, what are the signs that tell you communication is broken down?
Well, they have me in the office, right? So they've brought me in. So what happens is, there is, when I'm sitting with a group, the first thing that I notice is sometimes, there's folks that are engaged, there's folks that are emotionally not present. There is an air of sort of like walking on eggshells, what's going to happen here. So there's a bit of anxiety in the room. People aren't feeling grounded and connected with each other. So that's the first thing that I notice.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Tom, what patterns are emerging from your research interviews? How did wealthy families arrive at this disconnection between generations? I know you guys talk about, intentional and most of the time unintentional um, outcomes, but or things that happen that cause this. Can you delve into a little bit more about that
Yeah,
disconnection and
so
how
one
that
of
came about?
yeah, absolutely. One of the main areas of disconnection we're seeing is the preparation for wealth transfer. Um, by and large, the current owning generation is evaluating their next generation from a technical standpoint. They want to
Mm,
see ability, they want to see skills, they want to see tangible leadership. When we ask the next gen what they need to be equipped to handle the role they're stepping into, by and large, they said being emotionally mature and ready. So we have a disconnection in terms of what is the end goal for preparation for handing over wealth, for perhaps handing over ownership, perhaps even handing over some type of operating company. Now, when we dive a bit deeper and say, what is being done to kind of clarify this disconnect, almost 50% of respondents said more or less nothing. It's business as usual. And I think that's a risk. That's a risk to a lot of families. And I'd be lying if I said, we didn't hear a lot of times that families said this is, working on our communication this year and clarifying where we want to go is really important, but also the next quarter is really important and that's going to be our focus. And I understand that, but if you wanna make family a priority and you wanna make transitioning your wealth, smoothly and successfully as a priority, it's not gonna wait for the next quarter to be done. We see families waiting too long and then trying to rush it to get it done in a way that doesn't fit their family. And I think that's the most important thing is you can't just take a template and apply it to your family. Each family is very different. There's different skills, there's different knowledge in the family, and we really need to come together to discuss what is the path forward for the next gen, for the existing gen to have a smooth transfer. And I think those co-creation and those co-creation opportunities and those conversations by and large are not happening or they're not happening frequently enough.
Right. So, what's the difference between what families think is good communication versus what actually works?
Well, I think, it goes back to um, having a environment where we feel emotionally safe with each other to speak our truth, to be able to say, you know what, um, son, daughter, you're not ready, and here's why. Or to be able to say, you know what, dad, maybe, or mom, maybe you're hanging on to a little bit too long. Maybe it's time to let go of control and do something about it. To be able to feel vulnerable enough to be honest with each other, to speak what needs to be said.
Mhm.
If we don't have what we call safe space, it's very difficult to get things resolved. We're going to be, sort of skirting around the bush, walking on eggshells, or the obvious one is we're busy this quarter, we'll get to it next quarter.
Yep.
Avoidance is not a solution.
Yep. So how do you get away from that? Like, what is the catalyst to kind of like say not next quarter, not 2 quarters from now, but like today, like tomorrow? What is that catalyst that needs to happen?
Typically, we get approached by two types of families. We get approached by the family that is in conflict,
Mm,
and they've got, there's fires and they need to put out the fires. Or we get approached by families that say, you know what, we see what could happen if we don't do this work, so they
mm,
prioritize it, right? So, one doesn't start to be healthy over time. It starts with the decision.
yeah.
This is important, and it's important because of this reason, which is bigger than the obstacles or the lack of priorities. And you just take action because, you either take action or you don't. There has to be a desire. There's got to be a strong desire to say, this really, really matters. This is the future of my family. Because what happens is they don't have a clear vision. They may have a vision for the wealth, but they don't
Mhm.
have a vision for the family and how the vision for the family and wealth are intertwined. That piece has to be thought of. And until they're clear what that is, they're not going to do anything about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm assuming it needs to come from the top.
It needs to come, what's interesting is it has to, the current leader has to be involved and buy into the process. What's interesting is when I look at who approaches us, a lot of our business is referral. Actually, all of it is referral, or we speak at engagements. People go, we need to hire you. So when I look at who is engaging us first, I would say it's about 60% next gen, 40% current gen. Now, the current gen that engages us, it's interesting because they're willing to be vulnerable, saying, you know what? I'm really scared for the future. I've built this thing and it's incredibly successful and it's worth a lot of money. And now what do I do? I don't have the skill set on how do we transition to the kids? How are the kids ready? And the kids can be, 20, 30, 40, and 50, right? So there has to be a vulnerability of I am afraid and I don't know what to do and I don't know who to talk to.
Yeah.
That's the first piece. And we are advocating for founders and families to say, there is someone we can talk to. There's people out there that are experts at this. But you got to first acknowledge yourself, I'm really scared and I don't know what to do. and that takes courage and vulnerability.
Right. Right. Okay. So it'd be great if you could tell us about the profile of the family offices that were participating in your survey.
Yeah, absolutely. So we had, as I said, we had a relatively even split of founder, current owners, and next generation. For the most part, there were some kind of Gen 1, Gen 2, but I'd say for the most part, we're looking at Gen 3 and above. In terms of location, kind of what I mentioned previously is, North America, kind of Europe and Australia were the main kind of chunks, but we did get some respondents from Asia and Latin America as well. Um, and again, most of these families have a family office, a single
Mhm.
or part of a multi-family office. But we did also speak to some families that still had an operating company, which does kind of increase a little bit of the complexity of when you're planning for a transition and what you're going to do. So, you know, i- our interviews were quantitative as well as qualitative, and we got a lot of interesting kind of feedback on some of the processes, as well as something we didn't necessarily include in the report. But when you're talking about these topics, you definitely see some cultural differences that come into play
Mhm.
in terms of how things happen, when they happen, how it's executed, who knows when and what. And so there was some complexity there, but we didn't interview enough to be able to really draw conclusions on how that impacts. But taking in the context of preparation for wealth transfer, I think it's also, you need to understand that different cultures operate differently.
Mhm.
So that's kind of, roughly the types of groups we looked at. I mean, in terms of age, the next gen we considered kind of 45 and under, and the senior gen were kind of 55 and above. Obviously, there's a gap there, but there is a little bit of a buffer in terms of current ownership and in the process of transfer or not. So we did our best in terms of kind of getting those different groups at a key time where they can reflect on this and they're in it as well.
Yeah. So, what are some of the interesting or surprising things that came out of the survey?
So, oh, Franco, do you want to take
No, no, you
this?
go ahead.
So one of the really interesting things that we found and that we wanted to look at was the emotional challenges in families. And of the 77 people we interviewed, when we asked if there was an emotional challenge in their family, not one of them said no.
Mm.
So to us, that right there is, 100% of respondents identified at least one emotional challenge in their family. And I think that is really important to consider whether you're a family or you're an advisor. There probably is emotional challenges going on, whether you can identify them or pinpoint them or not. What's really interesting is when we asked the founder current owning generation to identify their top two challenges, emotional challenges, they identified entitlement and rivalry,
Oh,
which I don't think it's that far of a stretch to say those are generally associated with the next generation, right? So the current owning generation sees the challenges more in the next generation. So when we ask the next generation the same thing, their top two were communication and lack thereof, and control. And so they're seeing the emotional challenges in the senior generation. And again, when we come back to what we sort of spoke about earlier, the the key conversations are not kind of happening about putting this on the table and being able to work through it a little bit. And so it's getting us to a place where the divide and the disconnect is really growing between the generations, and that's why you see um a significant number of next gen are disengaging and don't see a path kind of mapped out for them for the future.
And I just want to add to that, if you think about it, in the process of transitioning wealth, emotions are inherent in every decision that families make, right? And postponing to it, well, we'll get to it next quarter, right? In my opinion, is irresponsible, dangerous, and could cause serious harm to a family's long-term legacy if they're not addressed.
yeah. 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 Definitely. So, I think it's interesting you guys talking about like control on one side and are they ready for control on the other side? That seems to be a theme there.
what happens is we tend to look at our relationships through our lens, right? So, for example, when you look at the challenges that the founding generation had, they were looking at it as a parental lens, right? Like it's the kids' entitlement and sibling rivalry, right? When it's And then when the next gen look at their parents, it's control and lack of communication.
Yeah.
And the lack of communication, I just want to clarify. I want to go back to the pieces is the founders aren't clarifying, aren't communicating because they don't know how to, right? They're afraid. They have no one to talk to about the stuff.
Mm,
So what they do is they sort of shut down,
yeah.
right? When what they should be doing is opening up, saying, you know what? Let's talk about this. We've got this, whatever this is, and I don't know what to do next.
Hmm.
Let's either try and talk about it within ourselves, or let's go find someone that's an expert to help us have these conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. It's interesting. My my sister was had to take this course on communication because she's in her late 40s. She manages everyone from her age to 20s, and how every decade people communicate differently. So the way I think we're our age group, in our like late 40s, 50s, the younger generation looks at the way we communicate as being more aggressive, even though we're not being aggressive.
Right, we're being
So
direct.
yeah, so it's just yeah, I mean, it's also that generational communication piece that's like no fault of anyone else. It's just how we were taught to communicate. And then you try to connect and it's hard.
And the other thing is when you look at talking about different generations, the younger generation today sees coaching as an asset.
Mhm.
Right, because, all high performers, whether they're athletes
Yeah.
or musicians
Yeah.
or leaders, have coaches. So having a coach now is a good thing to help you improve,
Right.
versus the old generation see that as maybe therapy, and you go to therapy because there's something wrong with you, right?
Right.
So again, 2 different ends of the perspective.
Right. Right.
And
It's
just add on to that, I think those are really interesting points, and I think it's also important to understand that the next generation leader in families is a different leader than a generation ago, and it's for a variety of reasons. The skills needed are different. I mean, we live in a very different world in 2025, 2026 than we did 30 years ago, even 20 years ago.
Mm.
And even influences, outside influences are really kind of shaping, how you should lead. And leaders of tomorrow really need a strong conviction of who they are because of the different influences and different forces and trends that are out there that are really quick to change our thinking because we saw a video.
right.
And I think that's also a risk in families. And so, again, kind of bringing it back when we look at kind of preparing that next generation, how can we do that in a really responsible manner for our family? And how can we kind of include them and maybe co-creating that? Because, you know, maybe my 25-year-old daughter knows more about AI than I do,
Yeah.
as an example. And maybe I can learn something from them about how that's going to impact our business. And maybe there's a
Yeah.
sharing opportunity there, for example. But let's not necessarily go into these things saying we have nothing to kind of learn from them. I think there's a lot of learning that can happen in families if we can kind of open it up a little bit and share and listen to each other.
Yeah. Oh my god, I totally agree with you. I mean, I'm a believer of I need mentors that are older than me, and I also have mentors who are actually younger than me
Hmm.
because
Yeah.
I can't keep up
Yeah.
the pace that they can.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
All right. Amazing. Okay. So let's move on to this psychology of money and families. I mean, I think this is such a hot topic. So, what drives the decision around money?
So, human beings, we have a narrative that came up from the past, and we have narratives about, men, women, God, sex, power, money, responsibility. So, an event occurs in our past where we make a decision about one of these topics, right? And we have a narrative around money that influences every decision we make around money, from how we earn it, gift it, inherit it, transition, and so forth. So, I find it fascinating that, the industry, advisors and families, when it comes to money, tend to focus on the how side of money. How do we structure it? How do we grow it? How do we transition it? What do we do with it? Rarely do we consider, gee, what's my parents or my kids or my siblings' narrative or beliefs about money, right? So I'm going to share a quick story with you. Did some work with a family, and so father started the business, three children in the 50s, two boys and a girl. Very male dominated business. And the daughter really didn't want to be involved in any conversations about money. They were talking about setting up a foundation, and she didn't want to be involved in that. Never want to talk about money at the dinner table. So it was all sort of removed. When we were coaching her, she shared that her belief is money is dangerous and it breaks up families. So I said, where did that come from? Right.
Okay.
So she shared that, when her parents were growing the wealth, all of their friends were of the same ilk, and as they all grew in wealth, right, and stature, she started to see her parents, friends, families breaking up,
Mm,
break up marriages, addictions, affairs, and she goes at that age, 18, money is the culprit for that. So as a result, money's evil. I don't want to be involved in it. Now, we were able to help her reframe that in that
mm,
money provides opportunities. So now she's very involved in the conversations around, transitioning ownership. She's running the family foundation. My point here is if we're planning for our financial capital, it makes sense to help the individuals we're planning with and for to understand what's their narrative about money.
yep. Yep. That makes a lot of sense. Um,
And everybody has a specific money model, money myth that's specific to them, but it'll fall into one of four categories. Okay, because here's the thing, and listeners, you may be shocked by this one. How we do money or how we treat our money is exactly how we treat our relationships, including ourselves.
mm,
So they're directly correlated. So how we do one, we do the other. So you can have five categories actually. There's the investor, they invest their money, they invest in relationships. The flip side is the spender. They spend money and they emotionally, metaphorically spend in relationships. They take, they're not givers. There's a subcategory, which is the self spender. They're always giving away themselves. There's the valuer respecter. They look after their possessions, they look after the relationships, they treasure them. And finally, there's the fearer, the one that is afraid of relationships and wealth, so they tend to self sabotage. So as you're listening, ask yourself, who am I? And then start to identify, what are the other players in your family? What characteristics they have around money?
wow, that's so interesting. Okay, I'm I'm thinking myself.
So as you're thinking,
Yeah.
imagine this. We have a shareholder meeting or a board meeting with 8 individuals. We have 8 different money models there that are influencing the decision about money, which, by the way, I have no idea what my money model is. So it's like we're making decisions blindly.
Can you share an example of how someone's money model sabotaged a family's wealth transition?
Yeah. Again, first to second generation, um, youngest son always felt that he was owed, and the reason was, the example, every family, for those of you that have watched The Godfather, will know what I mean. Every family has a Fredo, the sibling that gets the extra attention, that is enabled versus empowered. So they get enabled, they develop bad behavior, and they never get, you know, held to account. So that behavior continues. Okay, they just keep behaving more poorly and more poorly until finally the price of poker is so high, you can't call it, right. So this particular son felt he was entitled. So parents had a liquidity event shortly thereafter. He had an affair, and his sister's best friend was his wife. And then he decided to sue his father, for his perceived one quarter share of the money, even though he was not a shareholder. Mom wanted to come and continue to enable her son, so she paid the legal bill of her son suing her husband.
That's that's not that's crazy.
Yeah, yeah, all because I am owed. Legally, not a shareholder, I am owed one quarter of X. So I'm going to sue my dad.
Wow. That's a very sad situation.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
And as I tell, uh, you know, um, trust professionals and private family lawyers, is whenever you're witnessing bad behavior like that, keep in mind there's a narrative back here that's driving that bad behavior. If we're able to identify and transform that narrative, high probability that bad behavior stops.
right. Right. It's getting people right, communicating what you were talking
Hmm.
about, communicating,
Yeah,
understanding where people are coming from, right?
yeah, and it goes back to, do I feel emotionally safe to tell you exactly what I'm thinking and feeling at this time, knowing you're not going to hold it against me?
Yeah,
95% of families would probably say, you know what? I don't feel safe enough to do that.
right.
So until we address that emotional safety or lack thereof, it's going to be really difficult to transition wealth properly.
In your research, what surprised you most about how different generations view money and responsibility?
Um, so just specifically, we didn't ask, a question about the money piece, but that's something that perhaps we may want to explore a little bit later. I will say in some of the conversations for more of the qualitative side, I will say that in the vast majority of families, money is still a taboo subject. We spoke to several NextGen members who are in their 40s who don't have an idea of what is going on with the family financial side and money, and that's a problem, because if you want to get them involved, something happens that happened to me personally. It's a bit too late to say we need your help right
Mm.
now. So it's still, the money conversation is still being treated as a need to know basis. And quite honestly, I think that's one of the things that's probably adding to some of the emotional challenges that we talked about earlier. Now, the other thing I wanted to bring up is there are also some similarities between these two generations. And one of them is, overwhelmingly, both groups feel an enormous sense of pressure to perform. And 95% of the respondents said the pressure comes from themselves before family, before business, before anything else. So again, we have a situation where both it's a highly charged environment in a lot of these cases. These are families that have a lot at stake, and they don't feel kind of ready for what is coming. And they're putting an enormous pressure on themselves to succeed in whatever they're doing,
Yep.
but they're not providing an outlet for themselves to talk about this. Like we asked the current generation, like, when you want to talk about this, who do you talk about? And primarily it's their trusted advisor.
Mm.
And I get it, like that person's there for some of this stuff, but you need to have some of these conversations about how you're feeling in the family as well. And that's a piece of the pie that's really missing right now.
And if I just want to add on to that, I think what happens is when founders think that we need to have the conversation about the transition, in their mind, we need to disclose the number. What's the value that we're talking about here? Of the value of the wealth of the financial assets. In the work we do with the families we coach, we never bring up the dollar amount ever, because to us it's irrelevant in the conversation, right? It's about creating emotional safety to then be able to say, "Oh, by the way, the number's this, and what are we going to do with it?" But founders say, "If I'm going to have a conversation, I got to lead with a number." No, you don't. You don't have to. Not at all. We work with a family for up to 18 months, and never once is a dollar value discussed. It's all about over that 18 months, developing the environment of safe space to be able to address what needs to be addressed to ensure that the vision is met.
Hmm. Right. So, can we go deeper into this emotional side of money?
Sure. What would you
So,
like to know?
the things I don't know. So, what have you
Well,
seen on that side? Like maybe some case study or just yeah. I mean, what are the things that we should be looking out for? Right? You were saying it needs a safe
Yeah.
space. What are the things that you know that is needed by the next generation to get their hands around that emotional side? Are they ready?
Well, I think there are four fundamental questions that families may want to ask themselves. Number one, I go back to what's the vision here? What's the vision for the tangible assets, and what's the vision for the family relationships? And then, more importantly, what's the vision for the relationships between both of those intertwined, the money and the people? Okay. Number two, what do we need to address here? What's the stuff that's not spoken about, that's sort of swept under the rug, that's been avoided, that we need to talk about? Number three, what kind of environment can we create, both individually and collectively, to be able to address what we need to address? And finally, what's the long term strategy or process or structure to ensure that we maintain the environment to be able to address the issues so we can hit the mission? Right. And if you're not clear on what those answers are, get to work now,
Mhm.
because they're not going to become clear over time. And what I like the listener to keep in mind is, at the end of the day, we're all human beings, and all human beings have fear, and we all have pain. And most human beings don't want to face the fear or feel the pain.
Yeah.
So what do? We create these constructs of complex coping mechanisms to avoid. We're texting, we are boozing, we're working, we're shopping, we're building the business, everything but to avoid facing what we need to face.
Uh,
And here's the thing, that stuff isn't going to go away,
yeah.
right? So it's important to really say, I need to, as a founder, say, I need to face my fear of I don't know what to do. It's okay. You're not the only one going through it. And as a next gen, to be able to say, you know what?
Yeah.
I am really terrified of taking this over. I am scared of messing it up. It's okay to speak like that.
Right.
We run a retreat in Kenya, just as a side note, where we take next gen family members for 7 days, and we co-facilitate it with the Maasai warriors. And the whole purpose of that exercise is to help individuals identify what's their fear and how they're going to deal with it within 4 days of getting home.
Mm,
Because if we don't face our fears control and run us.
yeah. I completely agree with you. That's really fascinating. Um, so let's move on to real world applications. What does emotional governance actually look like in practice? Walk us through how family creates this.
Yeah. So, the first thing we do is emotional governance. First of all, let me define what it is being able to have your emotions in such tight control that they're an asset, not a liability to the system. And the system includes yourself as an individual and the collective group. Okay. So emotional governance really starts with myself. I need to be really clear on what my narrative is, but more importantly, how this narrative is impacting my decisions, my relationships, what I say and what I don't say, and how I behave. So being really clear on who I am as an individual and the why and the impact that has. Once we've got the individual clear on who they are and why they are, then we bring the family together and say, okay, now that you each know what your stuff is, let's collectively come up with what we call our guiding principles, which is basically how do we as a group agree to treat each other as human beings first before we throw the complexity of, parent, child, shareholder, director, all that stuff, which is just roles. Okay. So what makes us unique in the space is when we come up with a guiding principle, for example, transparency, we define it, and then we take it one step further. We say, what's the action that shows you're living the definition of transparency? So now we can measure because you're either doing it or you're not.
Mm-hmm.
So we start to create that container of safety individually, then collectively as a family. Thomas, do you want to add to that?
No, I have nothing to add to that. I thought that was incredibly succinct.
Thank you.
When families say we need better communication, what does that really mean?
Yeah. What I first of all, I'd say, what does that mean to you? Like, do you want a fax? Do you want a WhatsApp?
Yeah.
Right. Um, but what they're really saying is, I want to feel emotionally safe with you.
Mm, mm,
I want to be able to say, you know what, I'm thinking this, I'm feeling this, knowing that you're going to hold the space for me to have that conversation, and you're not going to throw it in my face or judge me or ridicule me or whatever, or what you've done in the past. And as I tell my families, you're not hiring me for better. You hire me for completely different, right? So you will be a different individual with yourself and each other as a result of the work.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
just want to read you something. I recently got this text from a client of mine. It brought tears to my eyes. He says that this is a 78-year-old founder. He says, Franco, just been thinking about you in the lead up to Christmas. What a journey his family has had with the amazing little guy from Bermuda. For me, it ranks as one of my greatest experiences in life, and with the knowledge that the journey is ongoing. We're all together for Christmas, and it will be fascinating to see how the family play out. I'm very confident. No doubt we'll catch up in the new year or whatever, which I look forward to. Merry Christmas.
Oh, that's so nice.
It's just, and here's a guy. I love him. Okay, I love him. But no, he's 80. Sorry, he's 80, and we've been on the platform together speaking to audience, and he says, I got to tell you, at first I was really scared
Yeah.
because here's what he did different. He included the spouses in the process.
Mm,
So the entire family went through the
yeah.
process, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, I don't know what's going to happen. Is it going to blow up? But his vulnerability is what inspired the family to go through.
Yeah.
So if you are a founder or a leader of your family business, your superpower is what you're afraid of, which is the vulnerability.
Mm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, so interesting. So let's look on the other side. If you had to pick one thing that successful families do differently versus, the things they need help with, what would that be?
Well, successful families will have two types of governance. They'll have traditional governance, which is policy and procedures for business and wealth decision making. And they'll have what we call emotional governance, which is policy and procedures for emotional management of the family, right? Where they could say, you know what, here's how we've agreed to treat each other. We're actually being that way, right? We all operate in safe space. And the beauty about the work that we do is all the family goes through the exact same coaching individually, and they're learning a new language. That's the different part. They're learning a new language where they can take full accountability for themselves and call each other up versus out. Very different, right? So successful families have designed a system to be able to operate in safe space.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd like to add to that, if I may. So I think the one other thing that families, successful, wealthy families do is they're proactive. And I think we've kind of alluded to a little bit of that here today of not waiting until the pot is boiling over, but actually seeing that the temperature is getting a little bit hot and doing something about it. I think the families generally are proactive in planning. They're proactive in addressing some of the underlying issues within the family. And one thing they're really proactive about is building like a personalized bespoke plan for their next gen. And that's one thing we also took away from the research is that can take many forms. We heard a whole range of different strategies, like one that was really interesting was rotational. This family still had an operating company, and the next gen started from receiving and the mailroom, and they spent time there, and they worked through all the departments to see, how this business works, how it makes money, the ins and outs of it, who's involved, and where could they maybe one day see a fit based on their skills and what they learned and what have you. And I think creating more of that personalized plan for the next gen and even for the outgoing generation as well. Just because you're giving up ownership, it doesn't mean that everybody wants to fly down to Florida and golf 300 days a year. A lot of these very successful founders and current owners want to stay involved. Find opportunities for them to stay involved. I mean, that's a tremendous amount of knowledge that could be walking out the door, that could be used to better employees, better strategy, what have you. So there's places there. And I think those successful families find, and it's cliche that transition is not an event, it's a process, but that's true. And sometimes those processes can go on for some time based on what you've decided is best for your family situation.
Fantastic. Okay, great. Um, let's talk a little bit about the next generation challenge. When 67% of the next gen don't see their path forward, what's really happening in those families?
Um, Well, I mean, we kind of alluded to it before, but I think a lot of it is not being kind of included in a lot of the processes. Inclusion in some of the governance for sure, but are they included in kind of the more foundational decision-making processes? And are they even included, are they welcomed in to even observe or be part of that? I think that's primarily what we're seeing now. Again, we want to look at consequences. So what are some of the consequences of that? You mentioned the two-thirds don't see a path forward. Another consequence is 6 times more next gen than current owners don't feel valued in their family. So for every one current owner who doesn't feel valued, you have 6 next gen. And I think that's a significant risk, and that's an issue that needs to be addressed. So it goes back again to creating an environment where they do feel that they can contribute. They do feel that they have value, maybe not in what is going on today, but maybe they could be involved in some of the more strategic conversations. Maybe, I've even, the family I worked with at the single family office, they had a junior board where, the next gen, when they were younger in their teens and 20s, they came in for 90 minutes and kind of heard a little bit, got to ask some questions, and then, went on their way. I mean, there's also a role to be played in creating an emotional attachment. And personally, I think that's really strong. I have an emotional attachment. This may seem bizarre, but I come from a family business, and my dad and my uncles had a food brokerage business. And in the 80s, they built a warehouse so they could store a lot of their products as they were going from, manufacturer to distributor. And my dad and my uncles would often have to work on the weekend, and my mom was studying or doing other things, and we were brought to work. And, the adults did work and had meetings, and me and my brother and sister and my cousins ran around and used the intercom systems
Yeah.
and inevitably made our way to the warehouse where there were Mars bars and boxes of Pringles and all sorts of stuff. And I'm dead serious. To this day, the smell of cardboard brings me back to that warehouse. I'm with my brothers and sisters. I'm 7, 8 years old. I'm running around without a care in the world. But it, like, unintentionally, there was an emotional attachment made there by just spending time at the location.
Yeah.
And I know not every one of these families has a physical location, but they might have a family office. They might have other things going on. They might have a philanthropy. They might have a foundation. There's places where we can bring the next gen in to be part of what we're doing and feel like they have value and can contribute to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I always say I think people want to be valued more than they want to get paid,
Mhm.
you know? And I think
100%.
yeah. So from the patriarch's standpoint, how do you balance preparing the next generation without creating entitlement?
Well, I think it is a capability and capacity thing, right?
Yeah.
So, in the work that we do, is we help the family design a very, very clear roadmap on what are the steps and requirements for ownership and leadership in the firm, right? Because as I tell our clients, having the same last name doesn't automatically qualify you. So I'm going to use myself as an example here, and I'm going to share a story. And it's okay to have the reaction you're gonna have because everybody has it. Okay, so not a lot of people know this. I don't know if you know this, Tommy, but um, for the longest time, I had a dream of playing in the NBA. Okay, exactly. The reality is, I'm short, I'm white, and I can't jump. Okay, I don't have the capability or the capacity to do it. It's no different in family business or managing family wealth. You got the capacity and capability. Just because you've got the same last name doesn't automatically qualify you. So if there is a clear roadmap, you either follow the map or you don't. You're not entitled. You get to contribute based on the roadmap that's designed. Big difference.
Mm.
Yeah, and just to add there, I think your question is super relevant and very good. And I think the interesting word there is the creating entitlement. To my knowledge, we're not born entitled. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't, when we come to the world, I don't think we're entitled. And I think by and large, we need to look at that a little bit more from a parenting lens.
Mm.
An extreme example, but if your kid is going to high school and a driver is driving him there, like what are you going to expect in 5 years when he gets his license or she gets their license? They're going to want a car. They're going to want this. Like, there's a way of bringing children into the money conversation. It can start with the personal budgeting, with the allowance, with things like that, but entitlement is created. And so we need to be a little bit careful, and I'm not saying don't have the money conversations, have the money conversations, but then don't leave money lying around, if you know what I mean. Like,
Yeah.
you still got to earn it. A very influential family in Canada, they talk about, when their kids get a car, and we work with when the kids get a car, they go through the whole process of learning what it means to get a car. To their eyes, it's like, I'm getting a car. It's like, yes, you're getting a car. Got to register the car and you got to pay for that. You need insurance. You got to pay for that. You got gas because you want to drive your buddies everywhere. You got that. So yeah, you want a car, but you got to understand all the different things that go into owning a car, because mom and dad are not going to pay for that if you want a car. And that's little things like that can help kids realize that. And I'll tell you, it's really difficult today when money isn't physically in our hands. It's a tap of a phone. So we don't, like, the next gen, you know, that's a large sweeping generalization, but probably the younger next gen are going to grow up never having money in their hands. How do you think that impacts the value they place on $20, on $5, on $10? They're never going to have it in their hand. It's an idea, right? And so we need to understand that. Again, it's a different world than it was when I was growing up, where I got 25 cents that I could go to the store and buy 3 things with. Like, it's a different world. And so we need to be cognizant of that and create proper plans for what we want kind of the end goal to be, and what is the proper time to bring the next gen in on that.
Fantastic. So, in terms of practical takeaways, if someone's listening, is running a family office, or is part of a wealthy family, what's one thing they could do this week to improve their family communication?
I would say, ask, if I'm listening, I would be asking myself, um, what is it that I'm avoiding here? Why I know this is important. I know the statistics. They're not in my favor, right? So what am I avoiding? What's the narrative back here that's preventing me from taking action?
Mm.
Right, and be as we call playfully curious with yourself. Don't judge yourself, don't condemn yourself. I'm just going to observe my thoughts back here and go, oh, it's this, it's the fear of this, or it's the insecurity of that, is maybe I don't want to, just ask yourself that question and start with that.
Yeah, and I would add on to that, is to, there's a number of things you can do. but I would say to ask yourself a question as well, and that is, if you could have one conversation across the generations in your family that you believe would strengthen the family, what would that conversation be? And I would say, once you find what that is, don't wait to have the conversation, have the conversation. And listen, relationships are tricky. Sometimes you need to prepare this. Hey, I'd like to have a conversation with you next week to talk about XYZ. The tact of having and the timing of the conversation needs to come in there. But what is that one piece that if you could really strengthen your family in a conversation, what would that be? And I would encourage all the listeners to have that conversation.
Right. If you have a family office that's trying to make this fix on their own, what are some of the biggest mistakes that they might be making if they were trying to do it themselves?
Trying to do it themselves.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
simple. It's like asking the heart surgeon to perform heart surgery on a spouse or their child.
Mm.
They're emotionally engaged. Can't do it.
I also think realistic expectations, like I cited in our research that a lot of families that see issues rely on governance, rely on those governance structures. And that's not really what they're designed for. So, you know, find find a way to open that up and kind of have those conversations in your family. And if something's not working, there are solutions out there. There's many solutions out there, and I would say be proactive about it, and um, include the family members in it.
Yeah. Okay. Any final thoughts on things that you might want to tell the audience that we haven't covered yet?
Yeah, I think, look at the transition as an opportunity to get closer to the family.
Mhm.
Look at it as a opportunity to get to know yourselves. Um, be playfully curious, right? Don't look at it as a chore or have fear about it. It's a natural thing to do. And find a professional to help you. Don't try and do it on your own.
S- so, final question: what can listeners expect from your research, and what's next for your work in this space?
Yeah, so the research itself is going to be published in the first quarter of 2026, and it's really exciting. We're very excited for it, and hopefully, we can get it into everybody's hands and they can have a look for themselves. Now, the exciting thing about that is twofold: one, the research gets out there into the public domain, and two, my job now turns to what is next. One trend that we're seeing a little bit more, and I think it probably will increase in importance going forward, is really the role of spouses in families of wealth. We've seen a number of different iterations of involving spouses and what that could look like, and it's really quite interesting, the dichotomy of families that really embrace them and bring them in to families that really kind of keep them a little bit more at arm's length, and not just what the impact of that is, but what is the longer term maybe impact on next gen involvement if they see one of their parents not being included, for example.
Mm.
And I think the other piece is exploring. I think we could go deeper on some of the more money questions that you raised, and how is money talked about, and when are those conversations initiated? Some of that is a little bit more difficult to sort of think back. When was the first time I sat at the table with my parents and talked about money? But I think it's important to bring that idea to the forefront, that talking about money should not be a taboo subject, that it should be something that's on the table and talked about in families in some way, shape, or form, depending on, your kind of reality and situation.
The other thing that we're excited about is we're going to be publishing my sixth book, book number
Mm.
6, which is all about family emotional traditions. So what are the things from past generations that keep us in operating the way we do today? So the title of the book we're playing with, I'm going to disclose it here, is What Your Parents Didn't Tell You.
Like that. I like that. All right. Well, we're very much looking forward to both the book and the research. Um, Thank you, Franco and Tom, for joining the Family Office Association. We really appreciate your time today and all the insights.
Thank you so much. Been an absolute pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, it was amazing. Thank you so much.